"Don't get in that helicopter, sir." The boy's voice was so quiet it barely carried across the wind, but something in it made Hayden Lockwood pause with his hand on the open cabin door. He had been one step away from climbing in, briefcase already passed to the co-pilot, the headset waiting on the leather seat where it always waited. Behind him, the city of Manhattan was beginning to soften under a late afternoon haze, the rooftop helipad still warm from the sun, and the rotors were already turning in that slow, patient circle they made before liftoff. He looked down. A boy was standing about 10 feet behind him, just past the edge of the safety railing where he should not have been able to stand at all. He was small, maybe 11 or 12 years old, in a dark hooded sweatshirt 2 sizes too large for him and sneakers that had clearly been someone else's first. His hands were balled into fists at his sides, and his eyes were fixed on Hayden's face with the kind of focus a child only has when he is very afraid and trying not to look it. "How did you get up here?" Hayden asked. The boy did not answer the question. He took a step closer to the helipad, his head lowered slightly so the security camera at the corner of the roof would catch the back of his hood and nothing more. "Please, sir," he said, "don't get in. I heard them on the stairwell. They said the gauges have been changed." The wind moved across the rooftop. The rotors continued their slow circle. The co-pilot, leaning forward in the cockpit, raised a gloved hand to wave Hayden in, miming a tap against his wristwatch. Hayden did not wave back. He stood completely still, one hand still on the open door, and felt for the second time in his adult life the very particular sensation of his entire schedule being interrupted by something he had not expected. "What's your name?" he said quietly. "Jamal, sir." "Jamal, where are you supposed to be right now?" "Anywhere but here, sir, but I had to come." Hayden Lockwood was 56 years old. He had built the Lockwood Aerial Group from 3 leased helicopters and a single hangar in Newark to a private aviation empire with fleets on 4 continents. He was not, by any stretch, a man who took advice from strangers. He certainly did not take it from children he had never met standing on the rooftop of his own corporate headquarters where they should not have been able to set foot. And yet there was something in the boy's eyes, something stripped down and exhausted and absolutely steady, that made him let go of the cabin door. He stepped back 2 paces. The co-pilot, sensing the change, killed the throttle and the engine began to wind down with a long descending whine. "Walk with me," Hayden said. He guided the boy along the back edge of the helipad, away from the wind, away from the cameras, and into the small glass shelter where executives waited during weather delays. He shut the door behind them. The afternoon sun came through the tinted panels in a soft amber wash, and for the first time he looked at Jamal properly. The boy was thin. The hoodie was stained at one cuff with what looked like old paint. There was a small scab above his eyebrow that had begun to heal. His shoes were tied with double knots in mismatched laces. "Tell me what you heard," Hayden said. "Slowly, don't leave anything out." Jamal swallowed. He glanced once at the closed door, then back at Hayden, and seemed to decide that this was the moment he had been preparing for all day. "I sleep behind the parking garage on 52nd, he said. "The one your building shares with the bank. There's a vent down there near the loading dock where the warm air comes out. I've been sleeping there since June. Most nights nobody bothers me." Hayden nodded. He did not interrupt. "Last night 2 men came down to the dock around 2 in the morning. They thought they were alone. One of them was a mechanic. I know because he had the patch on his jacket, the one with the wings. The other one I never saw before. They smoked 1 cigarette each and they talked about you, sir. They said your name 4 times. They said it had to look like the altimeter and the fuel reading, and that you would not notice because you never look at the panels when the pilot is doing the run-up." Hayden felt something inside his chest go very quiet. For a long moment Hayden did not speak. He looked at the boy through the soft amber light of the shelter, then past him at the helicopter still cooling on the pad, the rotors slowing into long, lazy arcs against the pale sky. The co-pilot was climbing out of the cockpit now, headset around his neck, looking toward the glass shelter with a polite confusion that had not yet sharpened into concern. "Jamal," Hayden said quietly, "I need you to be very careful with the next thing you tell me. Did either of those men say who told them to do it? Did either of them say a name? The boy nodded slowly. He had been waiting for the question. The one in the jacket said it twice, sir. He called him Mr. Vance. He said Mr. Vance had paid half already and that the rest would come Friday when the news broke. Hayden closed his eyes for a single beat. The name landed inside him the way a stone lands at the bottom of a deep well, without sound, but with a long and certain settling. Curtis Vance had been his chief operating officer for 11 years. Curtis Vance had been at his daughter's wedding. Curtis Vance had a daughter of his own who called Hayden Uncle Hayden because she could not pronounce his last name when she was 3. Anything else? He asked. His voice did not change. They said something about the board meeting on Friday morning, Jamal continued. They said after the crash the board would have to move fast and that the deputy would already be ready. They said the deputy had been ready for a year. The deputy, Hayden repeated. That's what they said, sir. I don't know what it means. I do. Hayden walked to the small bench against the wall of the shelter and sat down. He did this not because he was tired, although he was, but because he understood that if he kept standing he would walk back out onto the helipad and do something he would later regret. He had built a career on never doing anything he would later regret. He set his hands on his knees and looked at the boy. Jamal, why did you come here? You could have walked away. You could have stayed under that vent and pretended you heard nothing. How did you even get into this building? The boy hesitated. For the first time since he had spoken, his shoulders softened and he looked younger than he had a minute ago. My mom worked here, sir, before. She was on the night cleaning crew, the one your company contracts on the lower floors. She had a badge. She kept it in a coffee can in our old apartment. When we lost the apartment last year, I took the can with me. The badge still beeps the side door by the loading dock. I used it twice before, just to sleep inside when it got cold. I knew the stair that goes all the way up because she told me about it once. She said the executives never used it because they had elevators. And the helipad door. It's locked from the outside, sir, but not from the stairwell. The little red bar opens it. I came up an hour ago and waited behind the air unit. Hayden looked at him for a long second. He thought of all the security audits, all the consultants, all the access protocols he had signed off on for this very building, and how a thin boy in a stained hoodie with a dead woman's badge had walked past all of them because he had heard something the night before and decided he could not pretend he had not. Your mother, Hayden said carefully, is she still with us? Jamal shook his head once. Last winter, sir, pneumonia. She couldn't pay for the second round of antibiotics. Hayden did not answer right away. He understood that anything he said in this moment would either be the truth or it would be useless, and he was not in the habit of being useless. He simply nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he is locking a thing inside himself for later, and stood up. Stay here, he said. Do not open this door for anyone but me. I will be back in 4 minutes. Hayden stepped out of the glass shelter and into the wind. The helicopter sat on the pad with its rotors finally still, the late sun catching the polished black skin of the fuselage in a single long stripe. His co-pilot, a man named Rhys Devlin who had flown for him for 9 years, was standing beside the open cabin door with his hands on his hips, his headset hanging from one finger. Mr. Lockwood, Rhys called over, we're losing the window. Tower's already pushing us back twice. You want me to refile? Hayden walked toward him slowly, his hands in the pockets of his jacket, his face composed in the easy neutrality he had used for 30 years in negotiations he was not yet ready to enter. Rhys, he said, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it without asking why until tonight. Can you give me that? Rhys had flown Hayden through 2 engine warnings, 1 bird strike, and a controlled emergency landing in a soybean field in Pennsylvania. He had never seen his boss look exactly the way he was looking now. Yes, sir. Shut the bird down completely. Lock the cabin. Walk down to the lobby and tell whoever asks that we scrubbed the flight because of weather. Do not tell anyone, not security, not dispatch, not Mr. Vance's office, that I am still on the roof. Then go home. I will call you in 2 hours. Rhys held his eyes for a single beat. Then he nodded once, the way a man nods when he understands an order is more important than the explanation for it. Weather, he said. Yes, sir. He turned, climbed back into the cockpit briefly to finish the shutdown sequence, then locked the cabin and walked toward the small interior door that led to the executive elevators. He did not look back. Hayden watched him go until the door clicked shut behind him, and then he returned to the glass shelter. Jamal was standing exactly where he had been left, one hand pressed flat against the tinted glass, watching the empty pad. "Sit down," Hayden said gently. The boy sat on the small bench. Hayden sat across from him. "Jamal, I am going to ask you a few more questions, and then I am going to ask you to come with me somewhere safe. Is that all right?" The boy nodded. "The mechanic in the jacket, the one with the wings on his patch, can you describe him? Older, younger, tall, short, anything you remember?" Jamal closed his eyes for a second, the way children do when they are pulling a picture from somewhere behind their forehead. "Not old, sir. Maybe like a teacher's age, 40 maybe. He had a beard, but not a full one, the kind that's just on the chin, and his left hand had a bandage on 2 fingers like he had cut himself recently. The other man called him Pat once, just once." "Pat," Hayden repeated. He did not write it down. He did not need to. He had a memory that had been trained over a lifetime of contract negotiations to hold a name the moment he heard it, and he could already feel this one settling into the same shelf where Curtis Vance now sat. And the second man, the one who never came down before, what did he look like? Taller than the first one. Thin. Older, maybe 60. Long coat even though it wasn't cold. He didn't smoke his own cigarette. He held it, but he didn't light it. He just kept turning it in his fingers like he was thinking. Hayden absorbed this. A mechanic with a name and a board member with a plan was already a dangerous combination. A third figure, older and patient and not even pretending to smoke, was something else entirely. It was the shape of a man who had been brought in from the outside, the kind of man whose presence at a midnight loading dock meant the operation had a third layer Hayden had not yet seen. He took out his phone. He scrolled through his favorites until he reached the name he wanted, and he tapped it. "Marcus," he said when the line picked up. "Drop whatever you are doing. I need you here within the hour." Marcus Hale had been Hayden Lockwood's personal attorney for 17 years and his closest friend for 22. He arrived at the building 48 minutes after the call, walking through the lobby in a charcoal overcoat with a soft leather briefcase under one arm. The kind of unhurried walk a man cultivates when he has been called to too many emergencies to ever look like he is hurrying to one. He took the executive elevator to the 42nd floor, and then the maintenance stair to the roof because Hayden had told him to. And when he stepped out onto the helipad in the long blue light of early evening, he saw his client sitting on a bench inside a glass shelter, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, and a thin boy in a hooded sweatshirt sitting silently beside him. Marcus did not react. He simply opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind him. "Hayden." "Marcus, this is Jamal. Jamal, this is the most trustworthy man I know. Anything you said to me, you can say in front of him." Marcus sat down on the small chair across from them. He set his briefcase on the floor beside him. He did not take it out. He did not take out a notebook. He simply folded his hands in his lap the way he always did when he was preparing to absorb something he could not afford to mishear. "Tell me," he said. Hayden told him. He told it the way Jamal had told it to him, without ornament, without theory, just the bare sequence of what the boy had heard and seen. He included the names. He included the bandaged fingers. He included the unlit cigarette and the long coat. When he was finished, Marcus did not speak for almost a full minute. He looked out through the tinted glass at the helicopter sitting still on its pad. He looked at the boy. He looked back at Hayden. "Curtis," he said finally. "Yes." "And the deputy?" "Yes." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. He had drafted Curtis Vance's employment contract 11 years ago. He had drafted the succession clause that named the chief operating officer as interim chief executive in the event of the sudden incapacitation or death of the founder, pending a board vote to be held within 72 hours. He had drafted that clause at Hayden's specific request. He had argued against it at the time. Hayden had insisted because Hayden had trusted Curtis Vance the way a man trusts the brother he never had. "The Friday board meeting," Marcus said quietly. "Yes. They were going to ratify the succession before the news cycle even cooled." Yes. Marcus opened his eyes. He turned toward Jamal. Son, he said gently, I need to ask you one question and I need you to think carefully before you answer it. The patch on the man's jacket, the one with the wings. Was it the company patch, the Lockwood aerial patch, or was it a different one? Jamal thought. He looked down at his hands for a moment and then up at Marcus. It was the company one, sir. The blue circle with the silver wings inside. I seen it before on the side door uniforms, but it was sewed funny, like it had been pulled off something else and put on his jacket. The thread was a different color. Marcus looked at Hayden. Contractor, he said, not a staff mechanic. Someone who was given a patch to wear so he could move through your hangar without being questioned. He had a name, Hayden said. Pat. Marcus took out his phone. He typed for perhaps 30 seconds, sent a single message, and then put the phone away. My investigator, he said. Her name is Delia. She is the best I have. She is already on it. By tomorrow morning, we will know whether anyone named Pat has been near your aircraft in the last 2 weeks, and whether anyone bandaged 2 fingers in any clinic within 5 miles of your hangar in the same period. He stood up. He walked once to the glass and looked out at the helicopter, and then he turned back to them. Hayden, he said, we have a decision to make tonight, and we have to make it before you go home. Hayden looked up at him from the bench. The light in the shelter had begun to thin, the late sun pulling itself slowly down behind the towers to the west, and the amber wash on the glass had cooled into a pale gray. What kind of decision? Marcus sat back down. He laced his fingers together and leaned forward slightly. You have 2 paths, he said. The first is the loud one. We call the FBI tonight. They will move on the hangar before sunrise. They will pull every aircraft you own out of service for inspection. They will question Curtis at his home before he has finished his breakfast. The story will be in the financial press by the end of business tomorrow. The stock will drop somewhere between 12 and 18% before it stabilizes. The board will be in chaos. Curtis will hire the most expensive defense team in the city, and his lawyers will argue that the boy here is a confused homeless child who misheard a conversation he could not possibly understand. They will argue that there is no recording, no documents, no physical evidence beyond a child's word. They will probably not succeed, but they will make it expensive and slow. He paused. Hayden did not interrupt. The second path is the quiet one. We do not call anyone tonight. We let Curtis believe the plan is still in motion. You go home in a car driven by someone we trust. Tomorrow morning you arrive at the office at your usual time. You behave exactly as you always behave. You attend the Friday board meeting, and in the time between now and then, Delia and I gather every piece of evidence the loud path would have asked the FBI to gather for us. We document the mechanic. We document the third man. We trace the money. We give the federal prosecutor a finished case on a single tray, and we hand Curtis to him in a room where he cannot pretend he did not understand the question. Hayden absorbed this. He looked at Jamal, who was watching the exchange with the silent attention of a boy who understood that the adults in the room were now deciding something large. How long? Hayden asked. 48 hours, maybe 60. The board meeting is the natural close. He will be in the room. The deputy will be in the room. Whoever else is involved at that level will be in the room. We end it there. And the risk? The risk is real. If Curtis senses for one moment that you know, he will either run or he will move the timeline up. He has already paid half. He has men on the ground. If he panics, the second attempt will not look like the first. It will be faster and uglier and possibly aimed at more than just you. And Jamal, Marcus turned to look at the boy. His voice softened. Jamal does not go back to the loading dock. Not tonight, not any night. We put him somewhere safe. I have a sister who lives in a townhouse in Brooklyn Heights. She raised 3 boys of her own, and she has not had a child in her house in 11 years, and she has been telling me for the last 6 months that she is bored out of her mind. She will be glad to have him for a few days, and she will ask no questions of anyone. Jamal looked between them. He did not say anything, but his hands had unclenched for the first time since Hayden had first seen him on the helipad. Hayden was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. The quiet path, he said. We finish it on Friday. Marcus nodded once. He picked up his briefcase and stood. Then we move now. I will have a car at the lower garage in 15 minutes. It is not one of yours. The driver is one of Delia's people. He will take you home through a route Curtis cannot anticipate. Jamal comes with me. I will deliver him to my sister myself." He looked down at the boy. "Are you all right with that, son?" Jamal nodded. He looked at Hayden. "Will I see you again, sir?" "Friday afternoon," Hayden said. "I promise." The drive home took 51 minutes instead of the usual 19. The driver was a quiet man in his 40s named Owens, who did not introduce himself beyond his first name, and who took the East River Drive northbound for 2 exits longer than necessary, then doubled back through a residential street in Yorkville, before finally turning onto the long private lane that led to Hayden's home in the small wooded enclave above the river. He did not speak the entire trip. He simply watched his mirrors, and when he pulled into the circular drive in front of the house, he gave Hayden a small nod and waited until the front door had closed behind his passenger before pulling away again. Hayden stood for a moment in the foyer of his own house and listened. The marble floor under his shoes was the same marble it had been that morning. The grandfather clock by the curving staircase ticked the same slow tick it had ticked for 30 years. From somewhere in the back of the house, he could hear the soft rattle of dishes in the kitchen, the cook preparing supper. Everything was where it had always been. Everything looked exactly as it had looked the last time he had walked through this door. And yet the house felt different in a way he could not yet name. The way a familiar room feels different when you walk into it knowing that someone you trust has been searching it while you were gone. His wife came down the stairs. Eleanor Lockwood was 61 years old, slim, silver at the temples, dressed in soft navy slacks and a pale linen blouse, with a paperback book held loosely in one hand. She had been a federal prosecutor for 22 years before she had retired 6 years ago to write a book she had not yet finished, and she walked the way she had always walked, with a calm and slightly amused awareness of the room she was entering. "You're home early," she said. "Yes. The Boston flight, scrubbed, weather." She paused on the third step from the bottom and looked at him. He had been married to this woman for 34 years, and in those 34 years he had told her exactly 4 lies, all of them small, all of them admitted within a day. She had read him across courtrooms long before he had ever invited her to read him across a kitchen table, and she had never once mistaken his face. "Hayden," she said quietly, "what happened today?" He looked up at her. He had thought about this on the drive home. He had decided he would tell her tonight at dinner after the cook had gone in the small sunroom at the back of the house where the windows looked out over the dark garden and no one could see in. He had decided this carefully, the way he decided most things. He realized now, looking up at her on the third step from the bottom, that he had been wrong to think he could wait. "Come into the sunroom," he said. "Now, please." She did not ask. She set the book down on the small table by the stair and walked past him without a word. He told her everything. He told it in the same flat sequence he had told Marcus, with the same restraint, the same absence of theory. He told her about the boy on the helipad, about the patch sewn with the wrong thread, about the bandaged fingers and the unlit cigarette. He told her about Curtis Vance. He told her about the deputy. He told her about the quiet path and the Friday board meeting and the small Brooklyn townhouse, where a boy named Jamal was at this moment being introduced to Marcus Hale's sister. Eleanor listened without interrupting. She sat in the armchair across from him with her hands folded in her lap, her face composed in the careful neutrality she had once worn in courtrooms while listening to defendants explain themselves. When he finished, she did not move for a long moment. She looked out at the dark garden, then she turned her eyes back to him. "Curtis," she said. "Yes. At Caroline's wedding," she said quietly, "he gave a toast. I remember." Eleanor stood up slowly. She walked to the tall window that looked out over the back garden and stood for a long moment with her hand resting lightly on the frame. Outside, the last of the light had drained out of the sky and the small ground lamps along the stone path had begun to glow. "Hayden," she said without turning, "do you remember what I told you the day you hired him? You told me he watched my mouth when I talked, not my eyes." "Yes." "You told me to be careful." "Yes." "I should have listened." She turned. She did not say what he had expected her to say, which was some version of "I told you so." She had never said that to him in 34 years, and she did not say it now. She simply walked back to the armchair and sat down again, and she looked at him with the steady focus of a woman who had spent her career holding rooms together by refusing to leave them. "Marcus is right about the quiet path," she said. "I want to add something to it. Tell me. You have a federal prosecutor I know personally. Her name is Ada Marin. She handled 3 cases against me when I was still on the defense side toward the end of my career, and she was the only one I ever lost to cleanly. She is now the deputy chief of the Southern District's Fraud and Conspiracy Division. She is exactly the person who should be holding the file when Marcus and Delia finish building it. I want to call her tonight." "Eleanor," Marcus said, "no one. Not until Friday. He said no one in your office. He said no one Curtis can see. Ada is in neither category. She is in mine. She will keep the call to herself until we are ready. I have known her for 19 years, and she has never once let a confidence move before its time." Hayden considered this. He understood his wife well enough to know that when she said a thing in this particular tone, she was not asking permission. She was telling him gently what was going to happen next, and she was giving him the courtesy of being the first to hear it. "Call her," he said. She nodded once. She did not call from the sunroom. She walked through to the small study off the library, closed the door, and was gone for almost 20 minutes. When she came back, she sat down across from him again, and her face was the face he had seen across countless dinner tables after countless long days, calm and tired and ready. "She is in," Eleanor said. "She will not move openly until Friday afternoon, but she has authorized Delia to coordinate with 2 of her senior investigators starting tonight. Anything Delia finds will be received and preserved as if it had already been subpoenaed. By Friday morning, the case will exist in 2 parallel files, one with Marcus and one in a sealed drawer in Ada's office. Curtis will have no way to know that the second file exists. And the deputy, Ada will not move on him until Curtis is in custody. The moment Curtis is taken, the deputy will be picked up at his home within the same hour. Ada was very specific. She does not want him to have so much as 20 minutes to call a lawyer or burn a phone." Hayden absorbed this. He felt something he had not expected to feel, a small clean shift inside his chest, the kind of shift a man feels when he understands that the people standing around him have already begun carrying a weight he had not yet asked them to lift. "Eleanor." "Yes." "The boy," she softened. She reached across the small space between the 2 chairs and took his hand in both of hers. "Tell me about him," she said. He did. He told her about the stained cuff and the mismatched laces, and the dead woman's badge, and the vent behind the parking garage on 52nd Street. He told her about the mother who had cleaned the lower floors of his own building at night. He told her, finally, about the second round of antibiotics that had not been paid for. Eleanor did not let go of his hand for a long moment after he finished. She simply sat with him in the quiet sunroom, her thumb moving slowly across his knuckles, and looked out at the small ground lamps glowing along the stone path. "Hayden," she said finally, "whatever happens on Friday, that boy does not go back to a vent behind a parking garage. Not tomorrow, not next week, not ever. I know. I am not asking you to promise me. I am telling you what I have already decided. You can be involved in the decision or you can be informed of it, but it is going to happen. I want to be involved." "Good." She let go of his hand. She stood up, walked to the small bar cart by the window, and poured 2 short glasses of water from the crystal pitcher. She brought one back and pressed it into his hand. He realized only then that he had not eaten since breakfast and had not had a single sip of anything since the coffee at his desk that morning. "Drink," she said. "Then eat. Then sleep. Tomorrow you have to walk into that building and smile at a man who tried to kill you, and you cannot do that on an empty stomach and 3 hours of sleep." He drank. She watched him drink. Then she went to the kitchen herself, sent the cook home early, and brought back a tray of cold roast chicken and bread, and a small bowl of soup she had warmed on the stove. They ate together in the sunroom without speaking much. The phone rang once during the meal, Marcus confirming that Jamal was safely with his sister and already asleep on a couch in the second-floor study, having eaten 2 helpings of macaroni and not asked a single question about where he was. Hayden thanked him and ended the call. They went to bed before 10. Hayden did not expect to sleep, but he did. Aliner's hand was resting on his arm when he closed his eyes, and the next thing he was aware of was the gray light of morning at the bedroom window and his alarm chiming softly on the nightstand. He went into the office at his usual time. He took his usual elevator. He nodded at the same security officer he nodded at every morning. He stopped at the small coffee station on the 42nd floor and exchanged the same 2 sentences he always exchanged with the woman who ran it. He took the corner office at the end of the hall, set his briefcase on the credenza behind his desk, and opened his laptop. Curtis Vance came in at 9:14. He knocked twice on the open door the way he always did, leaned his shoulder against the frame the way he always did, and smiled the easy smile he had smiled at Hayden across 1,000 mornings. "Heard you scrubbed the Boston flight," he said. "Reese said the weather over Long Island Sound got ugly fast." "It did. You all right? You don't usually scrub." Reese was uncomfortable with the readings. "I trust Reese." Curtis nodded thoughtfully. He stepped into the office, closed the door behind him, and sat in the chair across from the desk. He crossed one leg over the other and laced his fingers around his knee. He was wearing the dark blue suit Hayden had complimented him on 3 weeks ago. He had a small new pin on his lapel, a thin silver wing that matched the company logo. "Hayden," he said, "before Friday's meeting, I wanted to talk to you about the Singapore expansion. I think we should revisit the timeline." "I have some thoughts." "Tell me," Curtis told him. He spoke for almost 20 minutes about routes and partnerships and the regulatory window in the strait, and Hayden listened with the same patient attention he had given Curtis Vance for 11 years. He nodded at the right moments. He asked 2 clarifying questions. He took a single note on a yellow pad. When Curtis finished, Hayden told him it was a strong proposal and that they should walk the board through it on Friday before the close of the meeting. Curtis smiled. He stood. He left the office. Hayden sat very still behind his desk and let his hands rest flat on the wood until they stopped trembling. The next 36 hours moved with the slow, steady weight of a river running under ice. Hayden went to his meetings. He answered his emails. He took 2 calls from clients in Frankfurt and 1 from a regulator in Ottawa. He had lunch in the executive dining room with the head of his maintenance division and asked him a series of carefully framed questions about the inspection protocols for the Rooftop helicopter, none of which the man could have known, were also being asked by Delia's investigators at the same hour through entirely different channels. Hayden took the answers, thanked him, and went back to his office. By Thursday evening, Marcus had what he needed. He came to the house at 9 in the evening with a leather folder under his arm and the patient face of a man who had not slept more than 4 hours in 2 nights. Aliner let him in. They sat in the sunroom together, the 3 of them, and Marcus laid the contents of the folder out across the low table between the chairs. The mechanic was named Patrick Doyle. He had been a contractor at a competitor's hangar in Teterboro for 9 years before being terminated 18 months ago for falsifying inspection logs on a fleet of 4 aircraft, one of which had subsequently developed an in-flight engine fire that had nearly killed 2 passengers. He had not been criminally charged because the competitor had quietly settled rather than face the discovery process. He had been hired 3 weeks ago by a small subcontractor that serviced Lockwood Aerial's hangar at Linden, under a name he had used briefly in Florida in 2019. His bandaged fingers had been treated at an urgent care in Elizabeth on the night before Jamal had heard him at the loading dock. The clinic had a security camera. The camera had caught Doyle entering and leaving alone, and it had also caught the long dark sedan that had been waiting in the parking lot, and the older man in the long coat sitting behind the wheel. The older man was named Anders Vale. He was 63. He had spent 21 years as an operations consultant for a company in London that specialized in what its own brochures described as discrete succession facilitation. He had been investigated 3 times by 3 different jurisdictions and had never been charged. He had entered the United States 11 days ago on a tourist visa. He had stayed at a small hotel in Newark under his own name and had been paid. According to a wire transfer Delia had traced through 2 shell entities, $400,000 by a holding company that Curtis Vance had quietly controlled through his brother-in-law since 2021. The deputy was named Howard Bell. He had been the chief financial officer for 9 years. He had signed off on the holding company's audits without flagging them. He had, according to a series of emails Delia had recovered through a forensic specialist working overnight at Ada Marin's authorization, been promised the chief operating officer's role inside the new structure within 6 months of the founder's death. Marcus laid all of it out without commentary. He let the documents speak. When he was finished, he looked up at Hayden. "Ada has it all," he said. "Sealed copy in her office. She has agents standing by. Friday morning, 10 o'clock, the moment Curtis steps into the boardroom, federal agents will enter the lobby. Howard Bell will be picked up at his home at the same minute. Doyle and Vale will be arrested at a small house in Elizabeth where they have been staying together since Wednesday afternoon. Ada has asked one thing of you." "What?" "She wants you in the boardroom when it happens. She wants Curtis to look at you when the agents walk through the door. She says juries remember that moment more than any document." Hayden nodded slowly. "I will be there." Alina reached across and took his hand again. She did not say anything. She simply held it. Marcus gathered the documents back into the folder. He stood. He looked at both of them for a long moment, and then he allowed himself, for the first time in 2 days, a small, tired smile. "Friday," he said. "Friday," Hayden answered. Friday morning arrived clean and cold. Hayden walked into the lobby at 9:40, took the executive elevator to the 44th floor, and entered the boardroom at 3 minutes before 10. Curtis Vance was already there, standing by the window with a cup of coffee, laughing at something Howard Bell had just said. The two of them turned when Hayden walked in and greeted him with the easy warmth of men who believed they had perhaps 40 minutes left before the world they had built for themselves began to deliver itself to them. The meeting was called to order at 10 exactly. The first item on the agenda was the quarterly safety review. Hayden listened patiently while the head of operations walked through the slides. At 10:07, the side door of the boardroom opened, and Ada Marin walked in, followed by 4 federal agents. Curtis Vance looked up. For one long second his face did not change. Then it did. It changed the way a face changes when a man understands, in the space of a single breath, that every contingency he has prepared for the past 14 months has just become irrelevant. He looked across the long table at Hayden, and Hayden looked back at him, and neither of them spoke. Ada read the charges in her even courtroom voice. Conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, securities fraud, obstruction. She named Howard Bell second, and Howard Bell did not even try to stand. The agents walked around the table, and the 2 men were led out through the same side door Ada had entered through, and the boardroom was very quiet for a long moment after the door had closed behind them. Hayden stood up. He looked at the remaining members of the board, who were staring at him with the slow-dawning expressions of people who had just understood that the morning they had walked into was not the morning they had been told to expect. "There will be a full briefing this afternoon," he said quietly. "I would ask you to stay in the building until then. This meeting is adjourned." He walked out of the boardroom alone. He took the elevator down to the lobby. Alina was waiting for him by the front doors, her coat over her arm, and beside her, in a clean blue jacket that was the right size for the first time in a long time, stood a thin boy with carefully combed hair and slightly nervous hands. Marcus's sister stood a few steps behind them, smiling quietly. Hayden walked across the lobby. He stopped in front of Jamal. He did not speak right away. He simply looked down at him, and the boy looked back up with the same steady eyes he had shown on the rooftop 4 days ago. "It's done," Hayden said. Jamal nodded once. "Thank you, sir." "No, son, thank you." He knelt down so his face was level with the boy's. He did this slowly because his knees were not what they had been at 30 and because he wanted the boy to see him do it. "Jamal," he said, Alina and I would like to talk to you about something. Not today. Today we are going to go home and have a real lunch and watch a movie if you want, and you are going to sleep in a room that has a door you can close. But in a few days, when you are ready, we would like to sit down with you and talk about what comes next. About school, about a home, about whether you would like that home to be ours. The boy's eyes filled, but he did not look away. He nodded once. I would like to talk about that, sir. Good. Hayden stood up slowly. Alina took the boy's hand on one side, and Hayden took it on the other, and the three of them walked out of the lobby together into the cold, bright morning. The car was waiting at the curb. Anthony Owens, who had driven Hayden home on Monday night, opened the rear door. He nodded at the boy, and the boy nodded back. They got in. The car pulled away from the building and into the slow, steady current of the city, and Hayden Lockwood, for the first time in 4 days, allowed himself to close his eyes. If this story moved you, please tap the like button and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Subscribe so the next story finds you too, and share this one with someone who needs to be reminded that a single brave voice, no matter how small, can change the entire course of a life.